Hello and welcome to another episode of 10 Podcast Lane. In this episode, we look into the disappearance of would-be time traveller Mike Marcum and the suspicious nature of his disappearance. Buckle in. This episode goes all the way to 88. In early 1995, Mike Marcum, later to be dubbed with the alias Madman, attempted to construct a time machine in his Stanbury homestead in Missouri, in the good old US of A. He began working on a device known as a Jacob's ladder. Essentially, it reduces the air resistance between two poles by using a laser, which Mike chose to use a modified compact disc laser. The end result would be a continuous arc. When Mike had everything constructed and ready, he turned it on and saw something very unusual. There was a heat mark, similar to what you'd see burnt into concrete, except it was in the shape of a vortex and was circular. Mike decided to see what exactly the Jacob's ladder had created and lobbed a sheet metal screw through the vortex to see what would happen. According to him, it vanished for half a second before reappearing a few feet away 3 seconds later. At the time, he was only 21 years old and he was a student majoring in electrical studies. When compared to his friends, Marcum was considered highly intelligent. Apparently, Marcum tried to build a time machine because he wanted to get the winning lottery numbers from the future. Keep that in mind for later. However, he had one problem, and that was that he needed a lot of power to make it work. After a few more tests, the CD laser caught on fire, and his Jacob's ladder was kaput. He figured if he was going to rebuild the machine again, he might as well use larger transformers, more power, and essentially turn everything up to 11. His original plan was to purchase the transformers, but they are quite expensive. He resorted to the alternative. At the local power station, there were 6 old transformers. Marcum stole 6 300+ pounds transformers from St. Joseph Light and Power Generating Station in King City, Missouri. While testing his experiments, he caused a mass blackout several blocks throughout his neighbourhood. It was about this time there was a warrant out for him, and Mike ended up being arrested on the 29th of January 1995 at his home with the charge of stealing the 6 transformers. Marcum was eventually released after serving several months in prison. After his release, Mike was invited to become a guest for Art Bell on Coast to Coast Radio. He told the story of the screw enigma and his plans to build another time machine, this time in a legally funded manner. During the interview, he gave his phone number and received non-stop calls for 3 days. The show helped Marcum a lot because many listeners shared with him ideas, funding, and spare parts to help him recreate the Jacob's ladder to a much larger scale. With his listeners' help and donations, his next time machine project was more powerful and much bigger than the previous one. While the original engine ran at a kilowatt rate, this time it was designed for 3 megawatts. It needed to be bigger and more powerful, as he wanted to test the machine on himself. Also, Marcum installed a rotating magnetic field. He said that rotating magnetic fields are more effective and efficient for the purposes that he intended. Art Bell had Mike as a guest for a second time around a year later. Marcum claimed to be experimenting with more sophisticated time machines. The electromagnetic vortex was big enough for a man to walk into. The interview ended with Marcum claiming to be just about ready to generate the desired amount of voltage to run the machine. When asked what he would take with him, Mike replied, "Just my cell phone." At the end of the show, Mike decided to give his address instead of his phone number to avoid the surge of calls he received after their first appearance when he gave his initial phone number. During this second appearance on Bell's show in 1996, he said he was 30 days away from completing his fully legal time machine. Mike Marcum soon turned to myth, as after 1997 he was not seen or heard from again, simply vanished. In a later episode of the Art Bell's Coast to Coast show, a listener rang in and relayed to Art a weird story he had found. In the 1930s, police found a dead man on a beach in California. The man was crushed to death in a strange metal tube and was unrecognisable, with a strange device found near his body. The caller said the device looked like a cell phone. Pretty weird, right? This April, be sure to tune in to Music and Gaming's Twitch channel for Arc April. Arc April is an arcade showcase event featuring various eras and genres of classic arcade games. In the latest Game of the Month event, we step back to a simpler time where arcade games swallowed quarters and were based on replay factor rather than graphics. There will be playthroughs, speedruns and races over the course of the event, and maybe even a world record or two. So make sure to visit twitch.tv/musicandgaming on Friday the 28th and Saturday the 29th of April to catch the event live. And now, back to the show. Now, this is where 99% of people think the story ends of Mike Marcum, but not on 10 Podcast Lane. This is where it gets really weird. On the forum called City Data, there was, let's say, an online sleuth with the username Alias Finn, who dug into Mr. Marcum a little further. Whilst researching to find what became of him, he realised he was mentioned in a few other sources besides that radio show. Mike had said he wanted to use his time travel machine to get winning lottery numbers because he needed the money for his projects. Very specific, just wanting to win the lottery to fund projects. Well, he found a Mike E. Marcum on a Finder website called beanverified.com, and it said he was born in 1995 and was living in Cincinnati, Ohio, with his previous location being Stanbury, Missouri. Now, just as a footnote, this was when he started his experiments, back in 95, and this date could be specifically chosen as a date of birth as some sort of ironic joke. Out of sheer curiosity, Alias Finn checked the lists of Missouri lottery winners for previous years, as Missouri is one of the few states in the US that are allowed to publish the winners' names. What was found was that the surname Marcum seemed to be lucky for winning lotteries, like really lucky. The winners all have different forenames, but if he was smart enough to invent a time machine, he would be smart enough not to use his own name. None of these people won the grand prize, but here are some of the winners. 2012, Aaron Marcum, Lebanon, Missouri. 2013, Howard Marcum, Pineville, Missouri. 2014, Rebecca Marcum, Pineville, Missouri. 2015, Randall Marcum, Kansas City, Missouri. 2018, Penny Marcum, Pineville, Missouri. 2019, Becky Marcum, Diamond, Missouri. Now I know what you're thinking. Cop on, Justin. You said earlier there was a body found crushed in the 1930s. But what if that wasn't him, but more a friend or willing guinea pig that offered himself as a sacrificial lamb in the name of science? Could he have actually survived, faked the birth cert and new life, and be funding projects under different names with lottery winnings earned through time travel, never actually winning the main prize, just staying under the radar to get away with it? Probably not, but it's a fun theory. Now, on to the final possibility. What people don't talk about is Mike Marcum's third appearance on Art Bell's show in 2015, where he talks about what happened with the second experiment, where he went, and what he had been up to since 1997. Mike mentions the two first appearances. He sounds similar to what he sounded like previously, albeit a little older, obviously, and also had exact knowledge of the machines that he created and materials used. So this is what apparently happened. After the 30-day time frame he gave for the experiment, he set up the machine like he did for previous experiments and had a cherry picker to go up 35 foot over the time machine. He didn't wait long at the top, afraid he might bottle it and not proceed, and jumped through the vortex. He claims it felt like being hit by a flashbang grenade and everything faded to white, and he passed out. He further claims to have come to 800 miles to the east of his location 2 years later, in the year 2000. After some time, his memories started returning, but he had no ID, no money, no anything, and was homeless. As days passed, he eventually remembered his social security number and went to get new ID. He took odd jobs to get money, eventually saving enough to get a Greyhound bus to go back to the warehouse where he conducted the experiment. On arrival, the warehouse was still there, but nothing else was. All his equipment, all his notes, everything were gone. All this time, Mike was trying to fill in the blanks with what had occurred over the past 2 years. With the amnesia that happened in that time frame, he could not remember the name of the warehouse owner to even check what had happened. The interview concluded with him wanting to build the machine again for a third time and recreate the experiment, which proves difficult as even his notes are completely gone. So even though, if it is him, he wasn't transported back to the 1930s or rigging lottery wins in Missouri, he is still claiming to have actually time travelled and stands by his claims, which is pretty insane to say the least. Was that actually him on Art Bell's show in 2015? The evidence points to it being him. He had detailed knowledge of the time machine, and it was the same sounding voice as the two previous interviews. Or was it him that was teleported back to the 1930s and died in the time travel machine? Who knows? But Mike claims it is him, and even started a GoFundMe in 2016 to try raise money with a dream to recreate the Jacob's Ladder, but this was not successful. As of today, Mike, with inverted commas, is no longer homeless and is back living in Ohio again, even with a Facebook page and account on Paranormal Stories, where he posted a few follow-up messages advising people he was not dead and very much alive and well. And that brings us to the end of another episode of 10 Podcast Lane. Really fun episode that time. Yeah, Mike Marcum, it's a weirdo. The whole thing that got me is just the fact that even if that is him in 2015, he's still claiming undoubtedly that he time travelled. Just fucking mental. So yeah, just want to thank everyone for listening. I want to give a big shout out to Gordo and those conspiracy guys for giving me a shout out and helping get the ball rolling again with a few listens on the podcast. Big thanks to Corpse O'Rourke and Sean Coombs, two of literally the best listeners, always giving advice and tips on where to go with the show. So it's really awesome. And yeah, keep an ear out for Arc April on Music and Gaming's Twitch channel at the end of April. That's going to be a laugh. I might be even doing some runs myself. So as always, until next time, aim for the bushes.